Hey everybody, Chris Moroz with YourIT here. I want to thank you for taking your time to join us today. We are joined today with Mike DePalma from Datto and going to discuss some business continuity needs. Now, for those of you who are current clients, you know that we provide multiple ways to protect your data and to make sure that we have a good business continuity plan in place for your business. Should there be any sort of interruption with your data, we can get you back up and going quickly. For those of you who maybe are looking to learn more about our services or learn more about the different options we provide, we've asked Mike to come on and discuss a little bit about how their solution, how we use their solution to provide those services, a little bit about how quickly it can work, what exactly it can do, and why it's so important to think about your plan and not just assume that we're doing everything we can to keep you safe, because while we are, there's different things to consider, such as how quickly you might need to be back up and running, how long that data might need to be stored, other various things. So we hope this is very informative for you. We look forward to talking to you afterwards and seeing how we can partner with you to make sure that your business is protected. So with that said, Mike, let's go ahead and throw it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm Mike DePalma, Channel Development Manager with Datto. So we are a business continuity solution provider based out of Norwalk, Connecticut. So we're about 40 miles east of Manhattan. We've been in business 12 years. For those of you who like a cool entrepreneurial story, our founder started the company when he was 22, started building devices by hand in his parents' basement. 8 years later, the Wall Street Journal gave us a $1 billion valuation. So it's one of those cool basement to $1 billion stories, which is awesome, and he's still involved. We have over 1,700 employees worldwide. We've got about 600 here in the Norwalk office, but 1,700 employees around the world, and we protect over 560 petabytes of data in our 9 data centers. And if a petabyte is a term you haven't heard before, I'll break it down like this. Most people know the size of an MP3 file. If you have 1 petabyte of MP3 files, you can play music continuously for 2,000 years. So that's the type of data that we're handling, and it's actually one of the largest private clouds in the world, so we don't use any third-party cloud. We're going to talk not much about the product until the end and the services, and I think that's a conversation you want to have with Chris offline. This is going to be more educational to see some of the threats that the small business community specifically are facing. Ransomware has become a hot button topic over the course of the last few years. I personally have been going around doing ransomware presentations, sitting on panels, seminars, and all the rest for the last 4 or 5 years. And 4 or 5 years ago, you'd get a couple of head nods. People weren't really paying attention. But as the years have gone on, more people have been impacted directly by ransomware. They have a client or a vendor who has, or they've just read things in the paper. I mean, it's every day you're hearing a new attack. And what really brought it to the forefront was back in May of 2017, we had what was called the WannaCry attack. And this attack was unique in that a single virus in a single day was able to impact 220,000 networks around the world. We never really saw anything like this type of scale. 150 countries were impacted. And what was interesting about this is typically what these hackers try to do, and these ransomware hackers specifically, is they will gather some information about you and your business so that when they do hit you with ransomware, they know how much to ask for, right? Because they're basically holding your data for ransom, and they're not going to give you that encryption key until you pay them some money. So if they've got a Fortune 500 company, they know they might be able to ask for 6-7 figures. If it's a one-man nonprofit, they might only get $800 or $1,000 and move on. This particular variant, even though it was so large in scale, they only asked for $300 across the board. It didn't matter if it was a municipality, a bank, or that one-man nonprofit. It was only $300. They only netted around $300,000 worldwide, which is really just a drop in the bucket. About $1 billion changed hands last year alone between the business community and these ransomware criminals. So the thought process in the IT space, and what we were thinking was, okay, this was just phase 1 of a 2-phase attack. First phase, they want to see how many networks they could impact, and the second phase was going to be, all right, let's figure out how to monetize this. So that's what we were all preparing for. And so about 2 weeks after this, I was on a panel with a gentleman from the FBI, and he was actually the head of cybersecurity in the Philadelphia office. And I go and I do my presentation, sit down, and he goes up and he's talking about some really scary stuff, cyber warfare and all that type of stuff. And he finishes with ransomware and WannaCry specifically because it's a hot button topic. He says, we actually have 2 theories. We've got one that Michael just laid out. We're preparing for that phase 2. That's why we're trying to figure out what vulnerabilities were exploited, trying to go out and do educational seminars like the one we were at. And so we're preparing for that. But we have a second theory. And at the time, this theory sounded very far-fetched. The second theory said that the whole goal wasn't to get that $300,000. It was to make worldwide news. It was so that it was the front page of every paper, the lead story on every website. Everyone in the world knew about WannaCry. And the reason for that is they were trying to scare people into buying Bitcoin. Now, follow me on this one. So what was happening was for the last 6 or 7 years, the criminals have always been asking for the money in Bitcoin because it's an anonymous cryptocurrency that couldn't be tracked back for them. They weren't asking for credit cards. They weren't asking for ACH payments. They knew if they can get you to pay them in Bitcoin, they were going to be safe and they weren't going to get caught. So they had been accumulating Bitcoin in the millions of dollars while a Bitcoin was $50, $100. And you could see on the screen, it was pretty stagnant really since its existence. And we saw it open up in 2016 at $443, opened up 2017 at $998. Then you saw that first huge spike. When was that? Well, that was May and June of 2017. And then we saw that crazy bonanza in Q4 where it actually spiked near 20,000 and opened up 2018 at 15,000. And so you would read the stories during that crazy boom of this 17-year-old kid who bought some Bitcoin a few years ago and now he's a millionaire, or the savvy investor who did the same thing. Those are the feel-good stories. But the reality was the folks that made hundreds of millions of dollars a day were the folks that had been accumulating millions of those Bitcoins when they were worth $100 each. Because what you saw these corporations start to buy into Bitcoin because they were preparing for phase 2 that all us experts were telling them were coming. And they wanted to be prepared so that if they were hit and all their protections did fail and they were hit, they were prepared to make that payment. And it's not like you walk into a Wells Fargo and say, hey, I need $200,000 in Bitcoin. You've got to go and you've got to find an exchange, set up an account, fund that. That could take days. And that's days that this business would be down. And so they wanted to make sure they were up and running. And then so when all those folks started buying that kind of volume of Bitcoin, like everything else, the market followed. So whether that theory was right or wrong, the fact remains those folks made billions of dollars during that crazy bonanza. And then we saw a sell-off, and now it's sitting in the 5,000-6,000 range. So I mentioned I go around and do a lot of presentations, and I do a lot of them for the industry. So folks like Chris, and we talk about our product. And I tried an experiment last year where I actually did it in 12 different cities, and it worked every single time. And what I would do is these industry events, you'd have 200 or so managed service providers in the room. All the vendors get up, they do their kind of song and dance. And so what I would do, I would ensure that my presentation was after a break. It wasn't too difficult. We were one of the good sponsors. So what I would do is at every city I went to, I would find a model. I'd go to a local modeling agency where I would hire a model. And all that this model would do, she'd be wearing a shirt that says Inverse Technologies. It was a company I made up. And during that break, she's holding a bowl full of USB sticks. And all I said was Inverse Technologies. Just looked like another piece of swag from another vendor. And she would hand them out to everybody. And everybody took them. Remember, these are IT experts. So then I'd get up on stage and I'm doing my presentation. I'd say, you know what? I had to submit this presentation a couple weeks ago, but I got a really, really cool video from our marketing team today. And I had team members in the room. I say, can you run in the back and plug this in? And I would hand that Inverse Technologies USB stick. And so he'd run in the back of the room. I'd be killing some time. Okay, it looks like he's going in to open up this file. I said, oh man, I got this really cool video. Wait till you see this. Yeah, it's right in that Inverse Technologies USB stick. Yeah, if you could just jump in there, you'll see the video there. Yeah, disaster demo video. Can you click on that? And then they'd click on it, and boom, the scary red screen would pop up. And everybody in the room knew what that screen looked like. This means I was hit with ransomware. So now I'm yelling at my teammate. Everybody's kind of looking around. And I look down, and I say, you guys all have these USB sticks. I saw you take them, right? And now that woman's long gone. And how do I know that? Because I hired her. And this was just a video I'm playing that looks like my colleague back there is opening it up. But think about if this was real, how easy it would be. There's 200 people in the room. I got half of you to plug that in, and I charge you $1,000. That's $100,000 I just made. And the only cost to me was spending a few $100s hiring somebody to hand these out. She doesn't even know she's part of my criminal mastermind plan here, and I'll be out the door. And this works, and this is how these guys are thinking. And it worked in every room. I'm sure Chris wouldn't have fallen for it, but we'll see. So I talked about the $1 billion number, right? But the actual number for the impact was around $75 billion. And the reason for this number is because this includes the cost of downtime and data loss. The ripple effects of these ransomware attacks are always much stronger than the actual payment. And so, I could spend an hour talking all these acronyms and technology, but the two that apply directly to ransomware and the ones that the criminals know about and they want to exploit are your RPO and your RTO, and it's very critical that every business can answer this question. Your RPO is the easy one. That's that star on the left. That's your recovery point objective. How much data are you at risk of losing at any given time? Simply put, how often are you taking your backups, and are you testing those backups? Is it daily? Is it hourly? Is it weekly? Everybody's got a different RPO goal. Most people can maybe absorb a day's worth of data loss. But for the most part, small businesses understand that. I very rarely talk to folks that aren't backing up their data in any form or fashion. So if that was the only piece of leverage that they had, they wouldn't be too successful. If you knew, okay, I could get my data back and I'm fine. The issue is that right-hand side of the screen, your recovery time objective. How much downtime would you incur? How long would it take you to bring all that data back to a new server, get it up and running into a production environment? Would that be 2 days, 2 weeks? Most people can't answer that question, and that's the reason why they pay, because you're faced with math that says, all right, pay me $5,000 in ransom or go ahead and be down for a week. The cost of that is going to be far greater. And so that's what we're talking about with that cost of downtime. And you see some real numbers. You saw the city of Baltimore earlier this year. Last year, we saw the city of Atlanta kind of get splashed in the news. And they were hit with ransomware, and they were asked for $52,000, which really for the city of Atlanta isn't a huge amount. But the government policy is not to pay these criminals. And there's a real strong reason why. A, you're emboldening them. But B, it's somewhat illegal because a lot of times these folks are terrorist organizations overseas. So if you are now paying them, you're now funding a terrorist organization. That, again, is illegal. So City of Atlanta is not going to pay it. Now, an article came out a couple weeks later that said that they've already spent $2.7 million trying to remediate this, and the city confirmed this. Now, they had to go back several months later and ask for another $9.5 million. They had systems down. Their criminal database was down. They had to go handwrite all of these citations, and somebody had to go in and enter them once they got their systems. It was months before they were up and running. So now that $52,000 ransom payment that they didn't take, they wound up having to spend about $12 million. That's where that $75 billion number comes from. The cost of the downtime always far exceeds. And these are, large numbers. They're almost hard to scale down to an SMB space. But I can tell you that the entire annual IT budget for the city of Atlanta is $35 million. So a third of that has now gone towards this one ransomware payment. And that scale will always be there. We've done ransomware reports the last 4 years, the largest of its kind, where we're just trying to talk to small businesses about whether they've been attacked or not. Every year, we find that every single industry is impacted. You might read about the hospitals and the municipalities, but the reality is most of these folks are going after the SMBs because they don't have the ability to get back up and running, and they can't absorb things like the city of Atlanta who can go out and bond off more money. PricewaterhouseCoopers put out a study last year that said that 71% of small businesses that were down for a week or more closed their doors within 12 months. And criminals know this. That's why they're getting so many folks to pay. And very little of these attacks at the SMB space are being reported. 2 reasons. One, the FBI is not going to put any resources into looking after a $5,000 ransomware attack. They just don't have the bandwidth. But more so, they don't want to report it because they don't want that to be splashed in the news. They don't want to be known as a company in their area, in their industry, that has been hit with ransomware. It's bad publicity. So they try to keep it in-house and remediate on their own. But within that study, that math bared out again. Right, we got $4,300 was the average ransom payment. The impact was 10 times higher. That downtime always exceeds that ransom payment. So the good news is that really data backup has evolved, like anything else in technology. And now beyond just the file and folder backup that most businesses are using, there's business continuity solutions that are out there that will eliminate both that RPO problem, but also the RTO problem. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So first and foremost, you want to have multiple copies of your data in different geographical locations. And this is for several reasons, but also really, let's think about a disaster that comes through. You have a hurricane if you're on the East Coast, or a tornado, anything that might impact your business. If you only have your on-premise data sitting in your office, well, pretty much anything that impacted your server is going to impact that backup. So you want to have multiple copies of your data. So you've got an on-premise device for those quick restores. But with us, we've got those 2 data centers that I mentioned. And we chose those locations, Reading, Pennsylvania, and Salt Lake City, Utah, simply because they're on the other side of the country from one another. So that regardless of what's going on in the country, whether it's a huge disaster that's impacting your location in one of the data centers for whatever reason, you still have that third copy of your data. So that's very critical, the on-premise as well as those 2 off-site solutions. You also want to make it automated. 91% of data loss comes from user error. And that's not malicious user error. That's somebody not knowing what not to click on. That's how these criminals are exploiting most of these ransomware attacks, is by sending out an email, a phishing email, and getting somebody to execute a file. But beyond that, who's taking those backups? Is there somebody manually taking those backups? Are they testing those backups? Are they taking that NAS device and bringing it home on the weekend? You want to take the user error out of it. So you want to be able to say, I'm going to set up my schedule. I need my RPO to be hourly. I'm going to set that up. That's what I have in my workstation at my office, hourly during business hours. And every one of those backups is tested, not just locally, but also the offsite sync. And maybe you do get a scary red X on there, and one of the backups failed. Well, now at least you're going to be able to be proactive, and Chris can go in and look and see what's going on, instead of finding out your backups failed at the time of disaster. Now, the way that backups are taken has also evolved pretty greatly. Instead of just backing up the files and folders that traditional backups tended to do, we now take a full image of that server that's being backed up, or that critical workstation. So we're going to not just capture the files and folders, but also the operating system, the applications, everything that lives on there. We take that snapshot. And once we have that original base image, you set up that schedule that we saw before, whether it's hourly, at daily, twice a day, and every one of those backup points are able to be independent of one another. It's called inverse chain technology. So you can go back to any data point. You can get hit with ransomware at 11 o'clock. You can roll back to that 10 o'clock backup, and because they're not layered upon previous backups, there's no risk of that being impacted, right? You take that time machine back to 10 o'clock. But ultimately, what this gives us the ability to do, most importantly, is to virtualize that server. So what does that look like? Well, if this represents your server, and you're hit with that scary red screen, since everything that lived on that server lives on that on-premise device and is subsequently sent off-site, you can now call Chris, and he'd spin up what's called a virtual machine. This on-premise device would now be operating as your server. Everyone in your office would continue to work business as usual. This is a production environment where you could make changes. Those backups are being taken. And so you could be in this virtualized state for days, weeks even, depending on what's going on around you. So before you even start that restoration process, which again can be painful and take days, let's just get your systems back up and running. Now you've taken out that second piece of leverage. You're reducing that downtime from days or weeks to minutes or hours. And you're going to be able to answer those RTO and RPO questions pretty firmly, because you know when those backups are being taken, you set up the schedule, you're testing those backups, and you're also testing that virtualization capability every single night. These cool virtualization capabilities are spun up in the background. They're brought up to a boot screen so we could see that that machine is bootable. There's a screenshot taken, and it's emailed off with a timestamp to say this has been tested as well. So all of these virtualization capabilities are being tested as well. And ultimately, you're able to do these cool features either locally from that device, but if that maybe that you have one of those natural disasters and that on-premise device is compromised as well, you could do these virtual capabilities from either one of the data centers as well. And so, again, with the evolution, we're talking about server backups. There's cloud continuity for endpoints as well that allows you to take an image-based backup of that. The other thing is people think about SaaS. Okay, I'm using my Gmail or my O365. That's safe. Well, 1 in 3 companies has still experienced data loss in their SaaS applications. There's something out there called Ransom Cloud. I saw a demo. There's a gentleman, you can Google him if you don't know him. His name is Kevin Mitnick. He at one point was on the FBI's most wanted list. He was the most wanted cyber criminal in the world. They did catch him. He did go to jail. He came out. He turned over to the good side. It's kind of a catch me if you can type story. And now he's got his own company, KnowBe4, which you might have heard of, but he also does a lot of seminars. And I watched him live do a demonstration of what Ransom Cloud looks like. He created this virus. And what he did, he had 2 laptops up on the screen. He sent an email from one of them to an O365 account. Looked like a legit email. Anti-Spam Pro. Hi, Mr. Mitnick. We're trying to update your experience here. All I need you to do is log back in. I'm going to give you the credentials. You're going to, you'll have this updated Anti-Spam Pro. And as soon as you do that, every single one of the emails in the entire domain are now encrypted. And there's only one email you can open, and that's the email from Mr. Mitnick that says, pay me my ransom. So these criminals are finding ways to impact your data regardless of where it lives. There's still, most folks are getting hit on their on-premise devices. That's just because there's so much low-hanging fruit there. Once that is sucked dry, they're going to go and they're going to find out things on your mobile devices, your endpoints, your SaaS applications. Unfortunately, the best and the brightest in the tech space are moving over to the dark side. So we have to try to stay ahead of them. But ultimately, if you're going to combat these criminals, you're going to take away their leverage. You got to make sure, A, if they encrypt your data, you don't have risk of losing that data. But beyond that, if they encrypt your data, you know that you could reduce that downtime because I'm just going to get up in that virtualized state. And you could start that restoration while you're still in that virtualized state, so the downtime on the back end is shortened up as well. So hopefully this provided some knowledge. Again, share this recording with anybody in your office that you think would be valuable. Again, Chris's information is up here, so I highly encourage you come out and you do you just do a network assessment. Chris, do you have any parting thoughts?
I don't. We had a couple of questions here to go over, but you addressed all of them. So I think that we are good to go. As Mike said, we're here to help however we can. So give us an email, give us a call. Happy to come out and do an assessment, take a look at what your current solution is, and look for some of those failure points to make sure that you don't fall victim to any of these issues that we talked about today.
Great. Great. Okay. Well, any questions, obviously reach out to Chris. You could find me on social media or reach out to me at mdepalma.com if you have any scary stories you want me to add to my presentation. But thank you all very much, and hopefully it was informative.